It was an interesting process for us because, you know, we had a few examples to look at in the world, but we were interested at first in looking at ways that some of the companies that you can pay to have do this whole system, you know, how do they do it? What do they do when they come in and produce a conference event? So we actually, you know, I don't want to say we stole ideas, but, you know, this is how the world works. You find out how the pros do things, and then you say, hey, I think we could do that ourselves. You know, in some cases we get to appear like the pros, and we did get some technical support as well when we needed it. So we learned that one of the processes that is being used right now is this pre-record of direct presentation, and then mix that with live Q&A and live chat. So you're essentially having a webinar style meeting. You are recording it. You're making sure that ahead of time you've been able to check everybody's sound and light, and, you know, make sure everybody looks good. And then when you record it, you don't have to worry about, you know, did something go wrong with the internet for that person, you know, halfway through their talk, and make sure the slides are running properly. So when you capture those presentations ahead of time on video, it really frees you up to be able to support a lot of other interactions during the live sessions. And you know, we saw that a couple of companies do that, and we said, we think we could do that. You know, we understand all the components there. It really, you know, as far as technical difficulty, a lot of it was just practicing and getting to know the software that we were using, getting to know Zoom, getting to know what the limitations are. Wow, it doesn't have closed captioning. Finding out what software needs to plug into that so we can have closed captioning, that sort of thing. But a lot of it was trial and error, you know, not highly technical. The only highly technical piece we discovered was we didn't feel secure in our own bandwidth to be able to broadcast and, you know, not have to worry about a storm or, you know, electricity being iffy, or, you know, internet not being as strong as we wanted. So that was really where we looked to outside help, and we used a really great production company that we had worked with in the past for in-person events. And, you know, they were able to broadcast for us and track the broadcast of things to make sure that it maintained the kind of bandwidth that it needed.
Yeah, I think a lot of the hurdles off the bat had to do around how do we scale this week-long in-person event that has tours and receptions, and how do we shrink that down to a handful of days and primarily online presentations and interactions. And Sarah's right on the nose. We were fortunate in that we had a lot of platforms and tools at our disposal already. Things like our website and social media and Zoom, and even our discussion platform. So I think the biggest hurdles, besides scaling everything and figuring out how we were going to do it, is what were we missing, and what were the components that we really needed to research to be able to do this, because we were really out of our depth here at times, it seemed.
I would say one of the first technical hurdles that we encountered was that it's just we've never done this before, so we had a lot of decisions to make. We had to decide if we wanted to do everything in-house, if we wanted to outsource everything, and we ended up going with sort of a hybrid model, where we did a lot of legwork in-house, and then we outsourced a little bit of basically just bandwidth to make sure that we could present at a high quality.
Yeah, I would add to that. We also had a number of platforms we already were using. So I think some of that discussion was, what can we continue to use that we have familiarity with, that our members have some familiarity with, and that we're already paying for. So I think looking at things like Zoom which, we already have Zoom accounts, we already were using those, and our members were starting to get to know those already. I think it gets a little more difficult, and I'm sure Caitlin and Ken can speak a lot better to this, but I think when we started talking about just a platform for holding this virtual event, and what were the needs involved in that, that really started to be a kind of a new conversation. Thinking about where does someone go to find that content, and how do they gain access to it. A lot of folks who are thinking about doing something virtual probably do need to think, I'm assuming this is going to have a revenue impact on your organization, whoever you are. And thinking about where you already have what we sometimes just call firewalls, but really secure access. That's something everyone needs to consider, what assets they already have in terms of that security. If you already have a website that has fairly complex secure components, so that say a member or someone attending something already has a way to enter, and that other people who are non-paying attendees aren't going to just access that. If that's important to you, you really have to look at which platforms are going to work for that secure experience.
That's a good way to put it, Sarah. A good place to start is sort of trace the journey of where you want people to go. Like, where do they start, and then where do they go from there, and then what are the access levels, the security levels, and any hurdles at that point, and then where do they go from there? So where do they start, and all the different pathways to get to where you want them to go. That's a good way to break it down, I think.
Yeah, and then beyond that, what is their user experience once they're there? Do they know where to go? Is it intuitive? Is if it's a very simple agenda and it's, everything's just one thing after another, and you experience the event all together, then it's fairly easy to format that. But if you have concurrent things that are going on at once, it starts getting complicated. You want to make sure you're looking at that from the perspective of someone understanding what's going on at a given moment and where they're supposed to be. One of the aspects of our system, which ended up being fine, but it did require people to click out of what they were watching when it came to an end, and click on the next event. So it didn't just continuously run. Some of these things, people are used to clicking in and out of things, but it's like every moment that you have to communicate, you have to figure out if you're being clear where someone should be, or else they're sitting there listening to some music and going, where'd everybody go?
It seemed to have been a fairly intuitive way to find your sessions and everything. As soon as you logged into the website, there was a button that said live sessions. And you click on that, and then it took you to a list of today's sessions. We were able to get it so that it was the right time zone in everybody's bailiwick, so that's great. This is something that's happening all over the country and not just in one place. And if you're looking to do a 5 o'clock happy hour on the East Coast, that's a 2 o'clock lunch break on the West Coast, and it's not quite the same experience.
We just started testing everything. Ken mentioned that the Higher Logic platform was free for a short period of time. A lot of these tools have trial versions, so we just got like trial versions of a lot of different things. And I had a lot of Zoom meetings with myself with laptops on my desk, and just tested out a lot of different things. And we decided that we could record the videos ourselves. We could do that process in-house. And we could edit the videos in-house. But when it came to presenting the videos, we wanted to make sure that we could present those at a high quality. And that requires having a really stable, really fast internet connection. So we decided to contract that part of it out. And I think it all turned out really well. We didn't have any major issues with any of our in-house recording processes. I mean, there was a lot of adapting, a lot of learning as we went. But I think we did pretty well.
There were always 2 people from our staff that were attending any recording session. the recording sessions, were able to go smoothly because we had someone to focus on, the technology side of things, as well as someone to really help support the speakers. So I think that general method worked throughout the conference through the live sessions as well. And it's not exactly just about the technology, but how we use the technology, because making sure that you are able to have a comfort level, watching the technology and sort of stewarding the process. It's really important to always have someone present for the people and someone present for the technology. So I think just as a general rule, making sure no one's ever spread too thin, having to monitor something technical and also be answering people's needs and questions in a moment.
Pre-recording sessions were definitely challenging. I would say the first thing that I think would be helpful is to actually do a couple trials, because we learned that after the first 2 sessions, everything went way more smooth, but then we didn't have that option to go back and record those sessions again. As far as the actual recordings, the pre-date before reminders were very good, with sort of a checklist of what people were supposed to do. People need constant reassurance that they are supposed to meet at a certain time. So to have that, to have the slides ahead of time in your power so that you can keep track of their time, especially when you have multiple people recording or multiple people in a single session, was very helpful to have the slides in your power, to ask them to send them to you so you could keep track of where they were going. I think the hardest thing was keeping people under their time, which is again why we have moderators during live sessions. And again, that customer service, you have to tell them to stop, but you have to be very tactful at that. That is important is for you to have 2 people doing the recording, so that in case one of the recordings doesn't work, you can have the other one as a backup. And also make sure you have a person who can keep track of the time and also keep track of when big things are happening. If a person skips, it needs to start again. Even though it feels like a lot of work, sometimes keeping track of that on an Excel sheet, and maybe even having that person, having yourself go back and rewatch it and make sure that you are noting when big things are happening, like someone cursed all of a sudden, or someone tripped on a word, or someone's internet really got choppy, so that the editor of the video doesn't have to do like double the work.
Yeah, and I think this was a successful model for us because we have a diverse membership spanning different geographical zones, different time zones, and so it allowed some of those larger groups, we could record them separately, pre-record them separately. We even had some international members, so it gave us a lot of flexibility to kind of pair some staff members with some presenters and do those pre-recordings, get them familiar with the technology, get them ready for what they might experience in live time. So just going over different features of Zoom, how polls and different things work, I think really was a good primer for our presenters. So ended up being a good choice for us, I think.
To really think about what are those moments that are really most special and how can you add that feeling of formality. So what we did was we actually had a filmmaker, but she was able to just add that extra piece because she had another angle of film. So she was able to cut, directly to someone's face. If you had that 50-50 view, where somebody's speaking, you have a slide, she was able to, really create a little bit more of a dynamic there, as well as add in some fancier features, just putting in a little bit of video collage when it was necessary. She created something called a stinger for us, which really makes us look pretty fancy. It's just sort of it's an animated logo that we start off a session with. When you can add those little pieces, especially if you already have a developed brand and, if you're a garden and you have a really nice logo, having someone just, add in a little bit of animation, maybe a sound. We had a lot of fun with just adding a little bit of, it's not even music, it's more like the intention for music. It's just like that little tiny piece of music. But those little pieces can really make it for the viewer feel like, oh, this is really polished. It's really fancy.
One thing that we started, and it sort of evolved over the 2.5 weeks that we were doing it, was an information sheet for our staff that were in each session in terms of who they were expecting and how much time there was in the question and answer period, and any sponsors that they needed to mention. And as we went through each week or each day, we realized, well, we should probably add this to that. So now we have a pretty good sheet for when we're doing this next time, to just start off with and know that that's what we need to fill out.
The pandemic moment really sort of allowed certain topics to really rise to the top, and then some things it was like, oh, well, maybe this isn't as urgent as a conversation right now. We also looked at what content would work in a virtual format and what would lend itself to being successful in that way. So we really reduced what we had originally planned for the in-person event by quite a bit, because we really had to think about what this was like from the presenter's perspective. We realized that, everyone, especially our industry, is so diverse. We have, folks coming to these types of technology at all different experiences. So we created a how-to video. We did it very fast. I think that was one of our first production pieces. I'm sure if we did it now, it would probably look very different. But we created a how-to video. We tried to share with presenters, what they might need to do to prepare to show up and be pre-recorded. We tried to give them a sense of support. We also scheduled pre-recordings for them. We sent them, technical specifications. We shared with them letters introducing liaisons to them from our staff and saying, you're not in this alone. We're going to have staff with you to support technology, to support your program itself. And we had liaisons from the program selection committee also, added into those conversations. So we really tried to create a feeling of support throughout that process.
Yeah, I think we really tried to emphasize, based on previous conferences, we had put together some materials that, especially moving to a virtual presentation style, that we wanted to emphasize to have larger font size. We really wanted the content to be engaging, so we wanted to be able to see the speaker, really make sure that they were using high resolution photos. We really wanted it to be interactive, and relevant sessions that could really capture the audience's attention. So we tried to highlight some of those things and emphasize accessibility as well. It's important to speak clearly and just be seen and heard. Even in the past when we've done in-person events, that can always be a challenge. So those were points we really emphasized to our presenter groups.
So when we started thinking about accessibility for a virtual event, we realized that there were a couple of advantages to being virtual. Obviously, things like affordability and access in general, for those who have not been able to afford an in-person conference, that was a real advantage. In terms of other types of accessibility, when we think about closed captioning, we really had to learn a lot about that. We learned that there were some limitations on the software that we had, and we had to supplement that. So something called CART, C-A-R-T, Communication Access Real-Time Translation, is a really important component. When you are doing something that is live, you need to be able to get, especially when you're doing live Q&A, you need to be able to have a system that's going to have real-time closed captioning happening. It's okay when you pre-record something, you can use a different type of system. You could do a post-production style. So, looking at that, everyone should be, whatever your event type is, you need to look at whether you're going with pre-recorded items, whether you're going with live items, but it's really important to match the right type of closed captioning to that event type so that you're getting accurate. And that's another thing. Not every piece of software that does closed captioning is good. It's important to see the difference between some of these different systems.
So Zoom does allow you to use third-party plugins to do captioning. We used one called 3Play Media, the number 3, Play. And it's a system where you register your events with this company, and then you can just use captioning in Zoom webinars. It worked pretty well for us. It was pretty accurate. It has a feature where you can create libraries of terms. So if you have, like proper names, or, if you're like us and you have a lot of horticultural terms, scientific names for plants, it's a good idea to add those in. When you do, it becomes even more accurate. Using the product itself is a little bit finicky, so I would definitely suggest testing it out and making sure that you know how it works. But once we got the hang of it, it ran pretty smoothly for most of our sessions.
So, but in addition to that, this isn't just about using a system. It's important to recognize that there are many other components of accessible presentations. Making sure that there are transcripts available is important. Making sure that when you're sharing resources, that those resources are accessible. I think one of the areas that we are going to be delving in a lot more, and I cannot say that we're perfect at this. This is why it's important from the very beginning. When you are going to do a virtual event, it's important that you share your intent to be as accessible as possible, but that you have a pathway for people to contact you if they have a need that you are not meeting, and to share your intent to make it accessible. I think one of the mistakes we made, or one of the ways that we could have done this better in terms of communication, is we probably should have designated some specific people to different aspects of accessibility so that there was a specific person to reach out to. As far as accessible presentations, this is something that we have just in the last couple of years started sharing. We have a document that is about how to prepare and present a presentation and make it as accessible as possible. This is a learning process for all of us. It's really, it's not as easy as it might seem either. When we were in person in a conference setting, we'd say, hey everybody, I know you think you're loud, but use a microphone. That was a big struggle for us. Folks think, oh, I'm loud, everybody hears me. It's not true, but the people in the back who have a hearing disability aren't gonna say, hey, I have a hearing disability and I really can't hear you. There are so many ways that our presentations and the way that we present slides, could be better. So it's important for us to start sharing a lot of those practices so people can get in the habit of changing their font sizes and not being confusing with slide images. There are a lot of ways that folks who have visual disabilities, hearing disabilities, there are so many ways, so many tricks to how we can do better. So I think it's just important that we share that content information, and I actually will make sure that we have one of these documents that are ready and accessible for those who want to take a look at some of these guidelines.
Yeah, I think there's I can give a couple pieces of advice of things that I thought we did really well. One was we really talked to those that do this kind of work. So we spoke with accessibility coordinators in our industry and tried to learn from them best practices, which I think was really helpful. If you have some organizations or professionals that you can talk to about what are the best practices for how to do this better. So we started from there and just sort of challenge a list of assumptions we had. I think you have to plan for a variety of scenarios, and there's going to be things that you're not going to be ready for, and you'll have to learn from that. One like that happened during this virtual conference, we quickly realized that we needed to have the presentations ready and available before and at the outset of every session, so that those that needed to download that and view them alongside while the speaker was talking, we needed to make that available. And that was a good accessibility principle that we kind of learned after the first day and applied forward. And just other really small things, adding people's pronouns, there's just different things that you assume and you just don't know about it, and you'll learn as you go along that you need to account for that. People that speak different languages, we have members They're, from different countries, and how is that going to translate when you're doing closed captioning, when you're downloading the transcript? You got to think about all of these different people, and so it's something we're learning more and more about.
When we announced, when we finally got the decision on April 6th that we were not going to our in-person event in Portland, which was unfortunate, we announced to our members, we did everything we needed to internally and tried to get some word out to our presenters, but also the next day, April 7th, sent out to all of our members that we were canceling the Portland event, and there was a teaser in that to sort of look out for the virtual conference coming up. Then we had a final general e-blast went out to everybody at the end of May, about a month ahead of the virtual conference. It was a mad dash to the finish line on June 25th. There was an early bird rate that we came up with. The final rates were $100 for our members and $125 for non-members, and then those went up $25 each after our early bird deadline, which was Friday, June 19th. We had several communication e-blasts between then and there, and also our monthly newsletters and specialty newsletters that went out. So lots of electronic communication.
Something that's really special about a virtual event is that ability to very quickly decide at the last minute to join and participate. And I definitely would recommend, taking advantage of that and in planning something, not getting too caught up with we want to make sure we cut off that registration or, have a deadline because we want people to be, receiving all this free information or whatever. I think it's really important with virtual events that we realize this is an age where people are very accustomed to jumping in and out of experiences. They may, even if they're coming in late, they might still want to jump in. Having a platform and an opportunity for people to make a last minute decision, I think it's very valuable. It allows you to be more flexible with your offerings.
Telling people the instructions on how to log into their account, if that's necessary, or how to access the materials. Maybe you don't have a password and a username. I think that's where we kind of ran into a little trouble, and that was quite time consuming.
Yeah, I just think that we're a small staff, and so for other organizations thinking about doing a similar kind of thing, just kind of clearly defining roles in advance, and customer service is pretty much key to the success of something like this. So just making sure to check in with the folks that are responsible for responding to inquiries or issues that related to payment. You got to make sure that there's a clear check-in points throughout the day so that stuff's going well.
Well, as soon as the decision was made to go virtual, we reached out to sponsors and exhibitors with 3 options. They could stay on as a virtual sponsor or exhibitor, roll over their commitment to 2021, or we could refund their fees. And we also gave them a deadline to respond as well, so that we could move forward with our time frame of collecting all the digital collateral that we would need. And we found that most people were sympathetic to our position, as they seemed to be in similar situations themselves. Everyone was pretty understanding and looking forward to seeing how we would take the event virtual. We did lose some, as virtual events aren't for everyone, and we recognize that this was a stressful time for many organizations who were being faced with laying off staff and cutting budgets. And also, due to limited technologies and time, we weren't able to provide a full exhibitor experience that we know is out there for some virtual expos and the like. We did a partner spotlight page where we offered personal videos. So we asked our sponsors and exhibitors to create just a 1-minute video introducing themselves and their organization. And then we also did a social media sponsor of the day, where we highlighted different sponsors leading up to the conference, just to kind of give them a shout out on social media.
Our team really needed to be in on the planning meetings with other staff to understand what was changing between live to virtual, like programming, pricing, and the tech platforms that we would have available to promote the sponsors and exhibitors. And as a bonus this year, we also told them that we would apply 50% of their funds to a resilience fundraising campaign that we were running at the time because of the pandemic. So in addition to the sponsor recognitions, that we could show that they were partners with us, with the portion of their sponsorship allocated to the campaign, and therefore truly supporting the industry. I think that it benefited us to focus on the relational aspect of the sponsors instead of the transaction that we had already worked out with them. We had an end game in mind with preserving our relationships instead of just satisfying the financial need for the association. So I think we'll continue to have some virtual aspect to our meetings in the future, but now we'll continue to diversify our offerings and create more meaningful ways to connect throughout the year.
Networking is always such a big part of why people come to our conference, and so trying to create that kind of feel at a virtual format is very difficult. And I think we saw that when we were researching what kind of other people were doing. So kind of having like that coffee break, like after a session, building in more time in between things when possible. If we had had a little more time, I think would have been nice. Sometimes like the session ended very abruptly, and I'm sure a lot of attendees had questions and wanted to follow up and exchange contact info. So just sort of like building in a little time to maybe get together, maybe doing some breakout rooms. But again, this was something we just sort of learned as we went along, and I think will apply in the future.
It was limited and there were concentrated times, but because we had unhooked many elements like our community meetings, we know that the conversation continues, and that I'd like to think of us as saying we didn't have to deliver 100% of everyone's social and networking needs within the confines of the virtual conference, because I think we created that aura, especially beforehand, in the months before, when the communities were coming together very often to talk about issues that were on their mind about COVID and their garden's impact. And also afterwards, as communities began to meet afterwards, I think we've extended the context for connection and engagement beyond the event itself.
We really made an attempt during the opening reception to create kind of a game show and fun, light feel. But it's really impossible to take something like that and create a fully interactive feeling for someone who's in attendance. There are limitations, and we do. I think when you deal with anything that's virtual, it's important to recognize that when we look each other in the eye in person, when we sit down and have a moment, those moments are really never going to be, in a virtual platform, you will not get the same feeling as when we sit together. And so, I think that's a really important aspect of this. We at some point have to say we're going to keep trying to problem solve all of the things we want, knowing that there are limitations to this platform.
I thought the live Q&A parts of the sessions worked well in that people understood very quickly the protocols for how to ask questions and how they were going to be answered, and how the presenters were encouraging people to post. I also felt just having a strong behind-the-scenes team of people to encourage engagement was a very important element that I think could be, it can't be overlooked. You can't let things almost just happen organically and see what happens. You do have to have people reminding people to engage without necessarily scripting them on exactly how, but there were many instances where we encouraged different ways and a very broad variety of ways to engage. I also felt that the social media aspect really generated a lot of interest.
We did do a number of things on social media that we normally would have done at the conference itself, including our rapid fire presentations, which are like 5-minute long bits that were up on our YouTube channel, and we promoted on Instagram and Facebook. And quite frankly, those people with their videos online, which are still on our YouTube channel, if you want to go look at them, reached hundreds of people more than they would have at the annual conference. So that was great to see. And also our poster session. We did a launch of our poster session at our free day on our Facebook page and encourage people to interact with our poster participants that way. So try to keep it on many different platforms and also in as many places as we could to just communicate with people.
Well, I think it's important not to underestimate the staff time involved in making a transition. If you're accustomed to doing something in a live event format, there is a lot of exploratory time. We broke that down into what we call task force groups. But if you have an event that you've done many times, you probably need to really give yourself enough time to brainstorm, what is this experience going to be, and does something translate to this virtual platform? Do we have to think differently, or do we have to drop certain parts of it? So just in terms of that piece of it, give yourself plenty of staff time for that component. The costs really range, obviously, because if you are paying another company to do production, if you're paying someone else to do video editing, if you're paying someone else to do production where they're sitting in on a session and helping to cue all of the speakers, and if they're involved in that way, I mean, that was where we absolutely drew the line, because costs can be really exponential when you get into that realm where you have someone kind of directing and producing for you. If you're already a content expert to some degree, or that's the world you're working in, you should definitely be doing that part of it as much as you can, and then putting that money into the technological security, making sure you've got fixes ready, making sure you've got high bandwidth. Those are things that are worth paying for. And things like Zoom accounts with really large access numbers, these are fairly low costs.
Yeah, I think more time to prepare would always be nice. The more time you have, the better. And I think we'll always have a plan B in our back pocket and be able to pivot to a virtual event a little quicker than we did this first time. I think pre-recording videos and doing the work ahead of time allowed us to be present during the virtual event and available to help run sessions and make sure that everything was running smoothly.
There are limitations in doing this style of, event, and it's never going to feel the same as sitting next to someone. So we're able to do a little bit, and we can jump platforms, and we can switch over to those meeting views. And I think ultimately we were very sad we weren't able to at least show attendees who else was at a given session. Some of these things are, still evolving, and they just, as products, they don't exist perfectly either. So it's important to remember that we're experiencing something that's probably a very high level of growth as far as what's available out there, and probably by next month, some of these things may even exist.
It's hard to look back and think about what changes that we would have made, because we were doing so much of this on the fly. And as planning and executing at the same time, short of just more time, more communication. But those are all things that, you can see sort of in hindsight. So I'm not sure what we would do differently, short of trying to maybe figure out how to do a little more connection points or networking opportunities within the process, or for our attendees as well. I feel like we were, all things considered, pretty realistic about what we were able to achieve. We made the best use of our time that we could. Yeah, I mean, hindsight's 2020. I'm sure there's any number of things that we could have done differently, but honestly, looking back on everything, I just think that we executed everything to the best of our abilities, and we tried to keep things as simple as possible and manage expectations as much as possible, and I think we achieved that.